How's everyone? This is a really long demo. It was recorded while I was recovering from COVID, and you're gonna unfortunately hear me yelling through a mask. I would only watch this one if I was absent, because in the future I'm just gonna do this live on the day. So if you're absent, here's what you missed.
So after we've got our ground here, we're gonna still work with a fairly watery color just so that we can get the paint off the brush. But we're gonna go slightly, just a slight departure from what we're dealing with the ground. So I'm just adding a little bit of light on here. And I'm gonna begin my drawing. Again, this is generic human head. So we're gonna start with an egg shape. And there are points in this where it's going to be darker and points where it's lighter. I got to make it a little bit more visible so that you can see. But I'm just sketching it there. Try to keep, I'm dealing with a really big brush, but try to keep your line drawing thin. And again, very similar to your background color. I'm going lighter than I would like to, and that is so that you can see from far away. If you have a little bit more water on your brush, it allows you to draw more easily. You don't have to work as much to get the paint off the brush. So next, we're gonna put our center axis down, and we're thinking about like a crescent moon, because we're tilting this face. I'm doing this for the camera, but for you, we're tilting it so that the nose is moving away from us, not totally in profile, not straight on. So we've got our center axis that comes down through here. We've divided the head now into a larger field and a smaller field. Then halfway from the skull to the chin, we're going to bring a division line. And that is the placement for the eyes. You don't have to labor about getting that line like really solid. Like I just did one quick brush stroke across. And again, I got to try to keep this light so that you can see it from far away, but you don't have to have yours very different from your background. In fact, it's better if you don't. I'm just doing this to emphasize it from a distance. But you want it to be similar to your background color. After you get that line that cuts halfway from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin, you divide that space in half with another line. You don't actually have to go all the way across. You just need enough to cut through here. That's the bottom of the nose. And then you cut that halfway from that line to the chin. Cut that in half. Wow, look at that. That is the opening of the mouth. Let's put a smile on that face. It's Heath Ledger's Joker. No? All right, well, you got it. That's good. So we're just going to place our facial features now. Think of ellipses or ovals for the eyes. Anything that is on this side is going to be larger on the face. Anything that is on the smaller side of that axis is going to be smaller. Again, this is a review from what we did the other day. We place a triangle here for the nose, and that is the edge sits on that axis. I'm trying to just do generic person, but I feel like these always end up looking like me anyway. And it's just like whatever you draw or whatever you paint, it ends up being a self-portrait, whether you're doing a person or you're doing an animal or a vehicle, something. Like the way you draw stylistically ends up looking like yourself. So on the one hand, this is just generic information, but I feel like it's going to end up looking like me. For the mouth, you end up with a rectangle that's pinched in, towards the top, and it widens at the base. So it's slightly tilting in this direction. Use that center axis as a guide for how the mouth is tilting this way. See that? And then a rectangle down below that. Once we've got our linear map in place, then we can begin our scumbling. To do that, you're going to pull as much paint off of the brush as you can, but it's actually a little less about the paint and it's more about the water, the hydration. You need a dry brush when you're scumbling. So we're going to mix up a light color which I'm going to get with white. When you're mixing light colors, you've got to bring the darker ones to them, rather than bringing the light color to the dark, because it'll take you longer to get there. If you're trying to mix a dark color, you bring the light one to that. You're trying to bring yourself towards whatever you need on your palette. If you need something that's more blue, your color mixing is down here. If you need something that's more yellow, your color mixing is up there. This is your light field, this is your dark field. Does that make sense? Really, I mean, you can always go lighter eventually, but I'm gonna try to mix something light. So to get myself there, I'm using white and yellow, but I want it to be a little bit more complex. So I'm gonna add some blue and a tiny bit of red. To control my color, I'm just using like the corner of the brush. And then I'm going back in with white from there. So I'm ending up basically with a soft gray. I can punch it up a little bit by adding more yellow, so I have this like pale green. Does that make sense? But it's more complicated because I used the colors across from it as well. Does that make sense? All right. Now, once you get your color, we're gonna start up at the top on the left. This will be a little easier with a big brush as opposed to the oil pastel that we had the other day. You're gonna just block down that line. This is actually, I think my brush is too wet. You should have it scratchy. I have too much paint on my brush. So you could just kind of lap the palette paper with the brush, or you could also pull some off. You want to be able to see the scratchy texture. That's better. So we just cut down that side there. From the hairline to the eyebrow, we move diagonally outward. Then we move in towards the eyeball. Then we take into account that the eyeball is round, so we move around that. Also, if you're watching this on camera, it's being recorded in 2024, so we're not still in the pandemic era, but I just so happen to be getting over COVID, so that's why I'm still wearing a mask. This didn't become a lifestyle for me or anything like that. If it's been a long time since I've seen you. And I guess for the sake of it, just go down all the way to the chin. Then when we get to the chin, we come out diagonally, like short, and then drop down flat. So it's a slight little bend there, then drop down, and then we go under the chin. So once you bring that cheek line down past the mouth, out for the chin, drop down for the flat part of the chin, and then back in for the underside of the chin. I haven't dipped back into my paint at all, if you notice. I'm hesitant, I'm tempted to do it now, but I don't think I need to. We'll find out. Start in the center, on the center line. Yeah, I need to. I knew it. Get a little more paint there. Start in the center line and bring it down to the eyebrow. I went a little too far. Since we never drew eyebrows, I just went a little too far. You get kind of this like L here. We come down, and then we come in towards this eye. That's the bridge of the nose, like in between the eyes. And then you run all the way down the side of the nose. Now I'm having to kind of scrub this off. That's kind of how it should be. If the paint is easily gliding off of your brush the way it did when you were doing your line drawing, you've got too much paint. You're gonna hear it scratch over the surface. Next, what you'd really do in terms of contour is come across the underside of the nose. However, in reality, that's in shadow. It's going to be dark, so you wouldn't apply light to that. You would, however, have light down here at the Cupid's bow, the philtrum, the little webbed area between your nose and your mouth. The upper lip, that is also in shadow because of the bevel. It's on an angle. You can even see with my gloves here. The top lip, since it's at an angle, it's not receiving overhead light, so it's in shadow. The lower lip, however, since it's pointed towards the light, it is receiving that light. So you're going to skip the skip the upper lip, paint the lower lip. So we almost have like a triangle of highlight, a space, and then a rectangle of highlight underneath that. Then you're going to skip a little bit more space because the lower lip is actually casting a shadow on this kind of like tilted part of the chin. So you would just have light here on the front plane of the chin. Lest we forget the neck, let's just drop a line down for the neck, because we never placed the neck in the first place. We ready to do the one on the right? It's the same thing. We're cutting across through here. Nope. Believe it or not, you're going to stick with the same highlight, because even though this side of the face would be in darkness, there is still light that reaches over here. I brought it right down to the eyeball and then cut in. So you're doing the same thing that you did basically twice now to that point. But again, there's hardly any paint here. This whole process is working with hardly ever any paint. Either it's dry or it's watered down. So we come in here and we cut in, and then we round it out for the eyeball, same as we did before. Does that make sense? Then we drop down for the cheek. Well, that's a big cheek. That cheek is almost as large as the nose, so it doesn't match up. I should have stopped about here. I'm matching the same angle that I had before on that outer cheek. You're doing essentially the same thing on the right that you did on the left, except you don't really find your way to the chin. So now I'm going to work across to bridge these areas, kind of across and up and down, because you saw me like kind of explain to somebody that maybe you want to travel with the form when they were doing their shape. So I bridge the forehead together. I'm still with the same color. Yep. Nope. This is just still Scumbling. I bridge the forehead. Now it gets a little complicated as I start to get in towards the cheeks. So we're not just going uniformly and connecting everything we just did, because it's more complicated than that. The only place we're doing that is on the forehead. When we get down into the eye, we're going to leave the eye exactly the way it was, with the light on one side and the shadow on the other. The reason being, your eyeball is undergoing lighting itself. The cheek, I expanded out a little bit over here, but there should be dark that comes in on that corner, so we're going to leave that. The same thing goes for this cheek. We're going to kind of leave that, and the chin, I guess, is done too. So that, most of our bridging was at the top. So we're going to expand this into a triangle, upside down. The reason I'm going to go in with something really, really light now is just to exaggerate for myself what is actually receiving the strongest highlights. So with the wide portion of the brush, making sure I don't have too much paint on here, I'm going to cut this down the side of the forehead. I'm going to skip the underside of the eyebrow, but I'm going to get the eye. I just realized this is also sort of like one of those Greek or Roman busts, like the heads that don't have any pupils or irises. That's fine, because I didn't account for those. We've got a kind of a rectangle coming here on the cheek, a line down here on that side of the cheek that goes right into our chin. I'm just going to actually block across the chin there. You see how that's amplifying some of the highlight on that left side? You could do the same for the neck, though not all the way up to the top of the neck, because the chin would be a casting shadow on it, so it just boosts down there. Like an upside down triangle here on the brow, and then cutting down here on the side of the nose, which is also triangular. The philtrum here, it's almost like you're going to outline a triangle. So it's like you're outlining the existing triangle, you're not really filling it in. So then it's like the light moves in. And then highlight on the lower lip there. Actually, you know what? Expand this out. So essentially you're putting light on the mustache area. Back over here, where the eyebrow would be, almost like draw an eyebrow for yourself. that is attached to that triangle from before. Skip some space. I got like a line of highlight for the eyeball. It's gonna look a little scary that if you leave it like that, so just kind of underline it. That's gonna be your eyelid. So you sort of have like, think of the sun setting into the ocean or something. So you did a swatch for the eyeball, and then you have a line that's connected under it, and that's the eyelid. And then if you skip some space, you can triangulate that cheek a little more thoroughly. Ideally, you don't glaze unless your scumbled layer is dry. Because if you're glazing on top of a wet scumbled layer, you're then just pulling it and mixing it. So I could let this dry a little bit more, but it's pretty close. So we start in our background. This is too thick. We're never painting the shadows. You're only ever painting kind of half of it. You see on that stroke that I just put down here, it's the same color, but with each succeeding layer of glaze, it's going to darken your ground. So these shadows are going to become very dramatic. Does that make sense? So we're doing these vertical pulls. It's overlapping the figure a little bit. I'm not being too precious about maintaining the crisp edges of the drawing. Here on the neck, I'm going to overlap that entirely. And again, my scumbled layer is still wet, but if I did this properly, I would have allowed it to dry entirely so that that wouldn't have moved. This is ruined. This is totally ruined. It's because I didn't wait for the scumbling to dry. Business. I'll tell you what, we do have like 10 minutes left. Why don't we actually just clean up? We'll pick up with this tomorrow. That way your scumbling won't be destroyed. Your whole painting won't be ruined. Like I'm just kind of ruining this. On the video here, just so you know, it's Friday, so I dressed down. I haven't given up on myself. All right, so we're gonna go back to our, we're going back to our dark color. If yours is dried out, just mix a little bit more and make sure that it's plenty wet. It's gotta be a transparent wash, and that wash should be done going, that's too concentrated. That wash should be done so that it goes along with the direction of your ground. And you're essentially going to glaze everything except your strongest highlights. I've still got way too much paint on my brush. So between spraying the, I'm using a spray bottle for time's sake, but you could use the water. You're essentially glazing everything except for your strongest highlights. And it should be transparent so that you're still able to see everything that's underneath. This is actually good. I think in here in the nose, it was a little too much. So I'm gonna paint, I'm thinking about like the shadow casting on the bridge of the nose and on the eye sockets. So kind of cut across here, almost as if you're giving like Bert from Sesame Street's eyebrow. We had done this yesterday where we like did the outside. When you go to the middle, which is kind of what I had already just started to do, just come down the forehead, you make Bert's eyebrow, come in for like a T on the nose or a triangle, move down towards the upper lip, another kind of like line across through the upper lip. See how now we can like really see it as pronounced? Skip space on the lower lip, come down the chin, and then bring it down the neck. Now we move on to the right. The strongest lights are gonna stay as they are. Everything else is getting glazed back. And as I'm doing it, for the most part, I'm trying to keep in the same vertical direction as my original ground. And you can see I did turn the brush like so, I'm cutting across the lower lip, I cut across that eyebrow, I kind of cut across to make that triangle on the nose. But generally, you're glazing everything down vertically so that it links to the ground. It gets a lot easier as you move to the right of the painting because then you're just making these vertical marks. I find it helpful sometimes is if you take a lot of the paint off the brush, but then you dip back into the water right before you apply. That way it keeps the paint from being too thick. So it's like, I guess whether you're scumbling or if you're glazing, right before you make contact with your paper, like make sure you pull the paint off. This whole side actually, to be honest, I know we had just, like you change your mind as you're painting. But I'm just thinking like, you should actually glaze over everything on this side too. Just leave the highlights that are here. Think of like a crescent moon, like the sliver of light. So when you glaze that back, you see now kind of what scumbling and glazing allows you to do. This color, which was identical to the color on this side, now looks much darker and is merging with the background. There's not as much of a dramatic difference between the light field and the shadow as there was before. I'll pause for a moment just to make sure you get caught up. I'm also going to take attendance because I just realized that I haven't done that yet. All right, we're going back to our highlighted color. All right, so we've got our light color. And what we want to do now is bridge the gap between our highlights and our shadows. That's what the glazing does, but we're also going to do it with the scumbling. So this time around, I don't know if you can see my palette, I've gone a little less green. This time instead of green, we're using red. Red is a good transitional color between highlight and shadow. It's a mid-tone. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint adjacent to our highlighted areas, like this area that we didn't glaze before. So we're cutting down the forehead. Think about the white of the eye. Reclaim some of that. So we're following those initial lines of contour that we did. We're just pulling out some of the highlights again, but not at the same intensity. We're trying to merge our highlighted areas with our shadows. When you're mixing colors, the more paint you're using, the longer it takes you to shift it towards another color. Does that make sense? So it's like you kind of want to mix in small quantities anyway. And if you have to remix, then you have to remix. All right, so we come down here in on the mouth area. You see before I had that kind of dark cut that was in between the cheek and the lip. Now it makes it more subtle. So it still is falling back into shadow and then back into highlight, but it's not as dramatic as it was before. Your lower lip has 3 planes. You have a side plane, a front plane, and then another side. So on the front plane, we end up adding that red. And then the same on the front plane of the chin. Now I've lost the neck entirely, so we're gonna reestablish that, I guess triangular. I sort of started on the left and then moved into the center, but I missed the entire upper part of the center. So starting on the left, and you're overlapping areas that had gotten glazed a moment ago, because you want to lift them out of the glaze so that it overlaps the glazed area with the scumbled highlighted area. Does that make sense? You want to create a sense of subtlety. Instead of just going straight from highlighted scumbling, like bright, to then deep dark shadow, you want to bridge the gap and get more subtlety. That's how we'll get more of a sense of realism. Now, if we come back to the bridge of the nose, we're going to run alongside our nose edge. And again, maybe you could see that brings us some subtlety. We never really established the edge of the nose here, the nostril. So you can also cut across so that now that opposite nostril is catching some light. So essentially what we just did here is we made an L. Coming down here into the upper lip, this is like is it isosceles triangle? Think of like those old Western mustaches that are like triangular, that are just on one side of the mouth. You're activating this other portion of the lip that wasn't really addressed before. Then we come in and we're going to pull some of that highlight into our our lower lip. This might feel as though now the entire mouth is being pulled towards the door. And yeah, right now it definitely looks like that. But thinking ahead, some of this is going to get glazed back. so that it's unified. Could also, while we're at it, just drop a mark down for this plane on the chin. Almost like we're connecting it to the lower lip. This we never really dealt with. Like this side of the temple. We're gonna make a triangle here that will establish the side temple plane moving onto the eyebrow. So we've got this kind of triangle coming in here on the side to establish the side temple. We're gonna do the same thing to establish the skin here above the eye. Skip some space because now this is an eyebrow. This is like the hair. So by skipping space, you've now established this skin between your eyelash or your eyelid and then the eyebrow. You can also do the white of the eye. So we've got this corner here, skip space for the iris and then the white of the eye. Think of like, you ever mow the lawn but you didn't bag it, but you also waited too long to cut the grass so it's like in clumps along the surface? It's like that. That's how you want your paint to be, where it's like, it's in a grouped area, but it has this like scratchy texture where you can see through. I haven't mowed my lawn in 3 weeks, and it's drying up because I severed a sprinkler line, so cool. Underneath the eye here, the cheekbone, that highlighted area that you had before, we're not gonna cover the entire thing, but we're gonna boost like the top of it with that color. So we're lifting that up. So I made a mark that runs kind of horizontally there, and that's lifting the top of that cheekbone out. This right here. See that? So the top of that triangle that we had on this cheek, we're cutting across that. And that idea is to lift the top of the cheekbone forward. We didn't paint any ears. So on the side of our skull, we're gonna make the number 7. I mean, you don't have to have it quite so angular. You can round it a little bit. Or maybe you think of a question mark, but there's my ear. The rim of the cartilage is just catching a little bit of light as it pops out from the behind the skull. If we had done this, we could have done this with our initial highlight color, but we would have had to glaze it back more. So by having it as like our second level of bright, it just sends it back more. We can also establish the back of the neck. The neck would come actually kind of right behind the ear. So if we just run a mark down from that ear, where we left off with the 7, that ends up showing like almost like a highlight on the back edge. After you have that, you're gonna go white and yellow. More white than yellow. We're gonna bring a really, really strong highlight into this. Bring back our highlights. Not all of them, but some of the strongest ones that would be here on the side of the face, where the light is coming from. So that's just here on the left, and then you do the same thing in the middle. This time when you get into the nose here, the bridge of your nose probably will catch some light, so let's bring a line down to connect our eyebrow, and then cut down the side of the nose. Skip space, highlight on the side of the lip. This is like the letter L again. A lot of L. Lower lip has to be brought back out again on one side. You could boost the, do like a pop of highlight on the side of the eye, like on the right, and then on that cheekbone. Once you've finished that scumbled layer, you're gonna pull the paint off the brush, because now what would happen is if you went into, actually, you know what? It's also, maybe this is a good point where you can rinse your brush in the water, because if you have any of the white and any of the light colors that you had been using, you're gonna end up putting a glaze on that's lighter than your ground, and it's gonna shift the whole painting. And we're essentially glazing everything except our strongest highlight again. Vertical marks, that's too much paint. It's always like more paint than you think it is. There, yeah, it's too blue. So you see when we're glazing, it's unifying, it's changing the color. So if you're color mixing It's not that it wasn't so good before, but if it was like too far removed from the rest of the painting, by applying this glaze, it's locking it in together. And if you're doing the glazing properly, you're not losing everything you had before. You can see as I'm glazing, I can still see my lower layers. Like everything I just painted is still there, it's just unifying it. It's creating more of a sense of atmosphere and depth. Everything on the right side is getting glazed together. So you're glazing over the entire right of the painting. Typically, you're just really preserving the highlighted areas on the wherever closer to the light source. If you kind of look here, there's a huge part of the face that we never even touched. It's still the ground, and that helps it to feel like it's unified and spatial. The last thing typically that you do on your painting before you call it done is scumble. And the reason for that is it helps you to lift areas out. And you can get progressively more detailed in each successive pass.
Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in person, or you can email me, and you can always refer back to this video as necessary. All right, see you tomorrow.